Good afternoon. I'm Jane Vossler, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Community Senior Center. This program is actually coming to you from both the Community Senior Center and the Vermont Humanities Speakers Bureau. We have a grant from them to do this, to help us with this program. And I'm happy to introduce Bill Mayers. He's been a reporter and a photographer. He's been a state legislator, a high school teacher, and an author. He's authored or co-authored 17 books. And the topics are wide-ranging, from the Marine Corps to desert travel to Vermont humor and beekeeping. He just published with Ross Conrad and some others, The Land of Milk and Honey, History of Beekeeping in Vermont. And that's what he's going to talk about today. So welcome, Bill, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Let's see.
And would everyone mute themselves, please? I think maybe you all are.
All right. Now, George, I got. All right. How about, let's see, get my slideshow from the beginning. How's that? Can you all see it? Thank you very much for having me, Jane, and hello to all you people, especially Robin and Mike, and whose daughter I taught at CVU. I wonder if I can just talk through this. It'd take about 30 minutes and then answer questions as long as you wish. It's a little easier for me to sustain this talk that I've developed. So, okay. A couple of quotes. The first one is from Jonathan Swift, who said, "We have rather chosen to fill our hives with honey and wax, thus furnishing mankind with the two noblest of things, which are sweetness and light." And from Mahatma Gandhi, "All we need is to be industrious, not like a machine, but like the honeybee." So there are 20,000 species of bees worldwide. However, of this number, only about 400 are social. That is, they live in colonies. The rest are solitary. Only 4 species produce enough honey to satisfy man's sweet tooth. 3 of those species are native to Asia. The eastern honeybee, or Apis cerana, the giant honeybee, or Apis dorsata, and the dwarf bee, Apis florea. The most prominent, prolific, and widespread bee species is the western honeybee, Apis mellifera. They have been carried to most of the globe, and because of their productivity and adaptability, the European honeybees are now raised in most parts of the world except Southeast Asia and the Arctic regions. They are the primary honeybees in the United States and the focus of this talk. Over 50 million years ago, bees split off from the wasp suborder and switched from animal to plant protein. Bees and flowers co-evolved, since flowering plants needed mobile pollinators to procreate, and bees needed the protein. So this book here is one I did 2005, and it was really a study of the whole beekeeping industry. It was not a how-to, but I went around to 15 or 16 states, talking to beekeepers, mostly commercial beekeepers, about what they did, and as you can see from the subtitle, I came back with some somber conclusions. Now, I'd like to try to help you shape the history of humans' relationship with bees into 4 ages. These are ones of roughly or wildly uneven lengths. The first age of honey was honey gathering, that covered those dim eons of time after man first tasted honey and bee stings first lanced human flesh. Neolithic humans discovered that keen eyesight, patient tracking, and brave climbing gained for the hunter, gained for the clan not just sweet savor and energy, but added nutrients from the bee brood, the eggs, and the honey itself. They also learned that smoke, not fire, was the divine tool for those who would calm the bees and take their honey. We'll never know, of course, but it's fun to imagine innumerable scenes in forests, swamps, deserts, steppes, where Aboriginal people first dipped their fingers into the hexagonal combs and withdrew the golden sweetness of honey. Did they sit down and eat bees, comb, brood, honey, and all? Who first hit upon the idea of capturing bees and then releasing them one by one to launch a beeline to their hive? Who first failed to clean a container of honey, only to come back a few weeks later and find that rainwater had transformed the dregs into intoxicating mead? So I'll just let you read these. I'm not going to read them to you, but these are just wonderful factoids that you can take away from this lecture and impress your friends when you go home. There won't be a quiz. And these are the products, principal products, lacking royal jelly, which is the food for all bees for their first 3 days, and then for the queens for their 9 days of gestation until the cell is capped over. And venom, the whole subset of apitherapy, which some people believe in, some people don't. So these are, again, the species, and the subspecies I'll come back to for Apis mellifera. These are species from different parts of primarily Europe and Russia, and they have been brought to this country for differing purposes, but I will get to that in a minute. Okay, so some of the first direct evidence of human search for honey comes from this cave painting in Spain. And this marvelous scene in Castellón in eastern Spain from about 4500 BCE shows a man climbing a rope ladder toward a bee nest. Around them are flying bees large as dogs. Now, the second era of beekeeping, or bees, or humans' relationship with bees, is the move away from collecting honey toward actually managing bees for their honey and wax. Beekeeping historian Eva Crane notes that the change from hunting for nests of bees with stored honey that man could take to keeping bees in his own hives probably took place independently in many parts of the world. It could well have been occasioned by a swarm settling in an empty basket or a tub left upside down, or in a pot lying on its side, or a hollow log with bees inside that could be carried home to what was later called an apiary. This cannot be called domestication because of the bee's natural, healthy instinct was to grow, divide, and swarm. And to this day, the bee's swarming instinct is a humbling reminder to beekeepers that bees will go their own way. Then, as now, the challenges are similar: getting bees to stick around, protecting them from the elements, human and natural, and building bee homes which allow the removal of the honey. Because bees attach their combs to the walls of the hive, the constant engineering problem was how to remove the honey without either killing the bees or destroying the hive's integrity. So if you see, the Egyptians really probably get the credit for being the first one to actually make crockery hives that they would, half of the one end of the hive would have the bees where the queen would lay the eggs and the brood, and the other half would be where they would collect the nectar. And they would put these combs, these hives, on boats and sail them up and down the Nile, depending upon the harvest, the nectar flow that they would collect from. So here again is this picture of the Spanish honey gatherer, and the bottom is the Egyptian beekeeper, large bees, small hives, but you get the idea. And So this is just throw it in because it's such a wonderful piece of art. So this is, what is this? This is 4,500 years ago. This work of Cretan gold art that depicted the bee. And those of you who like language know that mellifera is the Greek word for sweet. And so Apis mellifera means honeybee. And so you've heard people referred to as having a mellifluous voice. Well, that's where it comes from. So by 2400 BCE, beekeeping was well decided, and this shows them doing that showed them doing the logs, doing these what would you call them? Hives, tubular hives, and the industry flourished and was so successful that the Pharaoh Ramses III was able to offer 30,000 pounds of honey to the Nile god as a sacrifice. And some of them allegedly or really were embalmed in honey. So in Northern Europe, in the forests of Northern and Eastern Europe, hunting, and then beekeeping took a different turn. As beekeeping historian Eva Crane wrote, human hive building in Northern Europe followed the progressive evolutionary pattern of suspended hollow logs in trees to collect swarms, and finally keeping the logs, usually vertical, in a clearing on a forest floor or near the beekeeper's dwelling. Since there was a substantial danger to bees from bears and other predators, bees evolved, the beekeeping evolved and put hives into trees. And thus the bees were owned independently of the tree. And there was a middle-aged medieval custom called tanging, where if you had lost bees, you could go take a tin plate and go banging on it as you followed the direction of the swarm, because it would alight in a temporary location and you could try to retrieve it. And it was misunderstood by some people that the tanging, the noise, what it was actually making the bees collect in one space. That was not the case. You were just alerting the neighborhood that those were your bees and you were going to get them, and people get out of the way. Beekeeping in Central Europe took a big boost from the spread of Christianity because of the church's need for candles. Every abbey and monastery had its own apiary, and many of the peasants who worked or rented church land also kept bees, and so could pay part of their yearly rent in wax. As an improvement on logs, Northern Europeans moved to making skeps. The use of these inverted wooden straw baskets became so widespread that it has continued to be one of the most common symbols of beekeeping. The baskets were easy to make, transportable, and they could be extended to accommodate the increased production on a honey flow. However, straw was not immune to the weather, and there also evolved protective niches in stone walls called bee bowls, and then distinctive structures to house the beehives. So here's a modern skep, and what the bees would do is they'd start drawing comb down from those cross bars, and then when they were done, the beekeeper would either kill the bees by immersing them in water or sulfur smoke. Let's see. So by the early 17th century, a Spaniard, Luis Mendez de Torres, and then an Englishman, Charles Butler, concluded that the head of a hive was female. And Butler wrote a book called The Feminine Monarchy. Honeybees, these are skeps, probably, this is an old picture. These were probably late 19th century. And here's a variety of other bowls and skeps, and they got logs up in the upper left-hand corner. I wish I'd been able to see these. I just took these off a postcard. So honeybees were first brought to North America in the early 17th century to Jamestown and then to Plymouth. And through their fecundity and instinct to swarm, the white man's fly, as Native Americans termed them, preceded the gradual and ubiquitous European settlement of the continent. For the next 2.5 centuries, gifted amateurs across Europe struggled to gain more control over bees' activities. They charted the working relationship between the workers, the drones, and the queen. And for Charles Darwin, the bees posed an intellectual dilemma as he developed his theory of evolution. How could infertile workers successfully reproduce and flourish? And Darwin's elegant answer was that the natural selection may be applied to the family as well as to the individual and may thus gain its desired end. Well, then the third, this is just a fanciful picture of colonial beekeeping, probably around 1800. So the third age of human relationship with bees is that of honey as an industry. So throughout these hundreds of years, the central challenge for beekeepers was how to remove the honey without damaging the hive or killing the bees. There were all kinds of efforts to build new hives, to say all sorts of incantations, to try to improve on the skeps. Of course, the lasting drawback of the skeps was that you had to kill the bees. But then it remained this happens, I'll just tell you this, as I say, there were dozens of efforts to find hives that would solve this problem. And one of them was designed by a guy in Salisbury, Vermont, 1836. And this was his patent for such a hive, signed by Andrew Jackson. And it's down in the Sheldon Museum. So we put reference to it in the book. So it remained for a Yale-trained congregational minister in Philadelphia, one Lorenzo L. Langstroth, to split the atom of beekeeping. Langstroth had taken up beekeeping as a young man, and he read widely in the already considerable beekeeping literature. He became intrigued with the spacing between and above the frames. And he came up with the counterintuitive idea of giving bees more space in which to work. And in 1851 diary recording, he wrote, "Eureka," and because he discovered what he said was the self-evident idea of using the same bee space as in the shallow chambers came into my mind. And the bee space, which Langstroth discovered, was roughly 3/8 of an inch between the frames, which bees create so that they can crawl and work easily between the combs. And in effect, this space became their hallways, which, if narrower, he discovered, the bees would fill with a gluey propolis, which is an adhesive they use to seal the hive, protective substance. And if it's wider, they would fill it with new comb. So if you just think of the spaces, all the spaces between the outerwear and then between the frames is 3/8 of an inch. Now, I'll just take you back to, okay, so if you look at this picture, this is bee cutting down a swarm in Burlington, but the black, of course, in between the yellow is the comb. And that's, if you went and measured that would be 3/8 of an inch, so that the bees can work both sides of that comb. And this is what they would do in nature. And so Langstroth said, well, if I can replicate that with frames you could remove, you could then pull out the frames, get the bees off, shake them off, blow them off somehow, take out the honey, put the frame back in, and then you'd have the bees going right back to work. Well, within a decade of, Langstroth patented this, but it was so widely infringed upon that he never made any money from the invention. But within a decade, Langstroth's discovery had changed beekeeping from a cottage industry into big business and inaugurated this third age of beekeeping. The simplicity in design and inexpensive manufacture of the movable frame system swept the country and the world. And several other advances followed. The first one was it was a matrix for making sheets of foundation that you would then put in the hive. You'd put between in the frames, and the bees could draw that out rather than having to do it all from scratch the way they were doing it in the picture with me. And then the second was an extractor, like a washing machine, where you could take these frames, cut off the tops of the wax, put them in the frame, spin them around, honey flows to the bottom, put it out through a strainer, bottle it, and away you went. And then the third major invention was a smoker you could really control. And there were all kinds of ways of doing this, but basically it was a bellows and a metal tube where you could spray the hive with judicious amounts of smoke, not too much, not too little. You learn how to do this as a beekeeper. But the point of the smoke is to blunt the communication between the bees and each other, because primarily if they notice they are threatened in some way, like you approaching a hive, they emit an alarm pheromone. And what the smoke does, among other things, is blunt that and makes the bees at least calmer and much less prone to stinging intruders. So anybody who says they work their bees without smoke is somebody to avoid. And so this is a modern extractor, and this is probably a 32 frame extractor. You can see that it's spun around, and probably in 10 or 15 minutes, those frames it'll spin the honey out, and then leaving the cells undamaged. You could put them right back in the hive, and the bees, if there's still more nectar to bring in, they fill them up again. Accompanying this clutch of mechanical advances was a desire to improve the bees' genetic stock. Beekeepers now saw the economic weakness of the original German black bee, known as Apis mellifera mellifera, with its susceptibility to disease, nervous nature, and aggressive traits. Americans went in search of better bees and found them in Western and Eastern Europe. The first import were the Italians, Apis mellifera ligustica, probably still the most popular race of bees, calm, gentle, good at producing early brood, and slow to swarm. These were followed by Carniolans from the northern Balkans, which Carniolans would be from what is now Slovenia, and Caucasians from the region between the Black and the Caspian Sea. And in the 20th century, several new hybrids were developed in the US, but they were added to a well-known strain from England called the Buckfast. And then there was even a line of queens developed by a beekeeper in Middlebury, Charlie Mraz. Well, we now get to sort of the fourth era of beekeeping, which goes beyond honey production to their far greater value for pollination. And so the value of the honey produced in the United States from around 3 million hives is maybe $300 or $400 million. Okay, it sounds like something, but the value of bees for pollination is around 20 to 25 billion. And this is where, if you're going to be a big time beekeeper, you got to go into pollination. You're not going to be able to do it with just honey. And so, again, you can read this without me reading them to you, but these are the major crops pollinated by honeybees. And the biggest of all is almonds. So if you look at the picture down, the two pictures in the bottom, one on the lower left is stacks of 4 hives on a pallet. Get what is it? It's 2 hives per acre, and that's an almond grove. So there's 1 million acres of almonds. That means 2 million hives of bees, which means about 80% or 85% of all the bees in the United States have to be in California in January to pollinate almonds. Well, that's a lot of transport. And so that's what they're doing in the lower right-hand corner, is putting 500 hives on a truck, semi, and going from Florida, Pennsylvania, Maine, Minnesota, Texas, and they all flood in there to California. And there's about 400,000 hives that stay year-round in California. But after these migratory beekeepers are done, they have to get out of Dodge. And there have been cases where some of them don't leave soon enough and get their hives burned. So it's if not cutthroat, it's a very competitive business. And it's going to be subject to the travails of climate change. I mean, think about the water situation in California. But this is where this is in a way, the people that do this pollination are what provide the infrastructure for the rest of us much smaller beekeepers who are just doing honey. If you didn't have these guys, there wouldn't be the funding for research. There wouldn't be funding for building large scale numbers of equipment, spending money on improving the stock of the queens. So it's a big business. And again, you can just read through this very quickly. I think, except the first one, it says 1/3 of every mouthful you eat comes directly, indirectly from pollination, including, well, that's a little better than it used to be. It used to be that they'd say 1/3 of your diet comes from bees, and it's a real falsehood. But nonetheless, they're responsible. Your diet would be a lot different if there were no honeybees. I think you can say that without fear of contradiction. So let's see. Okay, last line. Since 1980s, the overall health of honeybees has been in decline with the advent of pathogens and pests. Okay. All right. You probably think you all remember to 2006 when people started saying, what's happening to the bees? And there was not any smoking gun. There was no one thing that people could point to and say, this is causing it. So they coined this term, the CCD, colony collapse disorder. But it did come from a variety of factors. Climate change, queen quality, insecticides, blah, blah, blah. If you can remember, there was one theory that the cell phones, our cell phone towers, were causing bees to zap their navigation system, so they would fly out of the hive and then they couldn't get back. And I think this has been poo-pooed, but a friend of mine wrote the following letter to the Washington Post. It says, beekeepers, beware of cell phones. Are cell phones killing our bees? I never let my bees use cell phones. They are social insects, and I have found that once I let them have cell phones, it is impossible to control their use. The charges from time overruns can bankrupt even the most efficient apiary operation. Once they learn to use them, they become dependent. They stop returning to the hive to dance. and just phone in the locations of their forage discoveries. Furthermore, the increased peer-to-peer communication plays havoc with traditional bee values. To heck with pheromones, they say. Chemical communication is passé compared to digital. As in many societies, the young are the early adopters, spending their time text messaging instead of doing their jobs. In the end, we observe a breakdown in hierarchy and, fatally, anti-royalist sentiment. This, then, is the cause of CCD, the foolish notions of independence among the immature, the loss of authority of the elders, breakdown in Greek group cohesion, and the collapse of the aristocracy. So he made a little humor out of really was a pretty big deal about what really has been happening, continues to happen. So I don't know if you can see this. You don't have to. There won't be a quiz, but I think it's a good graphic reminder that beekeepers and the bees have got a lot of forces on them, some of which are the beekeeper's responsibility and fault, and some of them are much broader and they affect everyone. And if you think about the beekeeper's practice, the pathogens that the various, primarily the varroa mite, which is a parasite to the Asian honeybee, pesticide application in nearby fields, quality of the food, the quality of the bees themselves, the health of the queens. It's a lot of it is a perfect storm, but the storm's winds vary in intensity and direction. So again, you don't have to memorize all this, but just I want to just show you. You see the red dots; those are varroa mites, and they jump species from Apis cerana to Apis mellifera about 100 years ago, and then work their way. So now they afflict really all Western honeybees in the world, I think, except for parts of Australia. But if you think of that as the pupa in a hive in a emerging or about to emerge bee, 5 or 6, 7 days later, that mite is, if it was on you, it'd be the size of a dinner plate. So they're not only eating the fat bodies in that bee pupa, but they're also by bringing viruses, which add to the biologic load on the bee. So one of the viruses is known dramatically as deformed wing virus. So when the bee emerges from the hive, it looks like it's a World War II aircraft returning, being shot up. It's got no wings, and so it lives for maybe a couple of hours and then dies. And there are other viruses that maybe let them live another day or two, and some of them they don't even emerge alive they get killed right in the cell. So they're a big deal. And then how do you deal with it without having too much insecticide inside the hive? And how do you and the another problem is, how can the beekeeper or beekeepers know that the insecticide that they use on the mites doesn't breed resistance, which it does? So it's been a real, it's introduced beekeepers to an old farming tactic, IPM, integrated pest management. So you really got to apply several different ways of treating for this mite. This is what it looks like under the electron microscope. Something out of Leonardo da Vinci. You don't have to read all of this, but if I'm looking on the right-hand side, it's a reminder. Here's a bee is living 6 weeks in the summer, And the bees will go through 6 or 7 different jobs in the course of their life, from emerging to clean cells to feeding to guarding the hive, transporting foods and water within the hive, and then emerging in the last 2 weeks of its life is when they're out collecting water and pollen and nectar. And most of them die outside the hive because when they're flying, they're carrying back 50% of their body weight with these products. All right, so here's just some pictures that I've taken in different places. This is what he's doing is he's feeding sugar water to his hive because there wasn't enough pollen, and we do this here in the fall if we don't have enough. I'm not pollen, but nectar. If there's not enough nectar brought in to the hive, we have to feed a sugar syrup for them to get up to weight so that they'll have enough food to get through the winter. This is down in Panama. These were the meanest bees I ever saw. If there was a scale of 10, they'd be 11. They chased us in a pickup truck about a quarter mile. And these are Africanized bees, but they're worse than normal Africanized bees because the beekeeper in this case lives in Panama City, and these guys are 300 miles north, and he said, go and get me some honey, basically, and you're going to have all the suffering, and I'm going to eat all the honey. So in Mexico, they're also Africanized, but they're much more, if you will, sophisticated or smart about how they set them up. And I worked down there off and on for a few years, and you can really work them. You can even pull off your gloves and work them. And look, Mom, no gloves. But they can do them, and they are somewhat more resistant to the varroa mites than regular bees. Okay, if you can count all of these, you get a prize if you can count all these hives here. I don't know how many there were, 20, 25. And it says, Manuel Hurachi and his partner in beekeeping, the donkey Boneco, they keep bees in the savannas of Brazil, known as El Cerrado. And this is actually where the Africanized bees came from. They were brought to this area in the 50s by a biologist who thought he could raise the production of honey in this area, which is like the Sahel in Africa. And yes, they did, but they also killed a lot of animals and people as they moved through the continent and then eventually crossed the Rio Grande in 1990 at the town of Hidalgo. And the town hall in the town of Hidalgo now has a model of a honeybee. It's the size of an elephant right on the front, right on the lawn in front of the city hall to mark that historic moment. Okay, there's just a few slides there. The Spaniards using that cave painting, the Irish, the Luxembourg, Chinese. And this is our book we did just before COVID. And it's, dare we say, it's a good book. And no other book like it for any other state. And these are there. That's Ross Conrad on the left. Dave Trombley was a former bee inspector. Bad photo, but this guy is my favorite of all the beekeepers in Vermont history. Augustine Manham had been a harness maker in Waitsfield, and when the Civil War broke out, he joined the Vermont regiments and fought at Gettysburg and survived. He was wounded, but guys on each side of him were killed. He came home, and someone gave him a book about beekeeping, And within 4 years, he had 150 hives. And then eventually he grew to around 750 hives. And he had bees in yards from Bristol all the way to Lake Champlain. And he was the largest beekeeper in Vermont. And then after his wife died in 1890, he moved to California to raise potatoes until he died. But look at this. Isn't it amazing? I mean, there's got to be more than 100 hives in Virgins. And each of them probably producing, well, probably at least 30 pounds. Then here are the beekeepers of that era. We found this photograph in the Orwell Elementary School. Maxine Manchester was from a beekeeping family in not Orwell, maybe Manchester. Anyway, she was the Eastern Apiculture Society is a multi-state beekeeping organization. There's no purely national group, but this is maybe 20 states together, and she was the first secretary. And this is taken of probably Vermont Life, 1955, something like that. And Enid Tompkins taught beekeeping at UVM, and Sister Angela was at the not Mount St. Mary's. It's the place on Prospect Street in Burlington, and she had up to 20 hives, I think. Charlie Mraz is a great, certainly the most legendary Vermont beekeeper, and maybe even within the world. You ask people. Someone said he was down in Mexico, and they said, how many people in this audience know who Jesus Christ is? And I think there were 70%. And how many know Charlie Mraz? And I think it was 75%, or some whimsical story. But he was legendary for his work in Central America and his breeding the queens. And he wrote hundreds of articles for beekeeping magazines, and he was really macho about this. Mike Palmer is still alive. He's got 900 hives up in Franklin County. This was my first mentor, Arnold Waters, who was a retired geologist. He retired to Waterford, and he was the first person who really got me interested in beekeeping. Rick Dretches is an old picture of him, but he just won a really cool award down in North Carolina. Has this black jar award. So they put honeys from all kinds of entrants in black jars, and then they have the judges taste them. And he won this year and won $5,000. So that's a pretty big deal. And this is Steve Reese. He used to be an inspector. Before I end, I just want to remind you, honeybees are not the only pollinators. There are lots and lots and lots and lots. And this guy, Stephen Buckman, once said at a conference, he said in sotto voce, but he yelled it out. He said, I hate honeybees because they're getting all the research money. And it's a reminder of all these different honeybees. And now I'm happy to take questions. So I got to get out of here, right? No. Join? No. Hey, George, help me. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Is that all right? Okay. Anybody got any questions? Yeah, Rod.
I, over the last few years, have not been able to keep a hive, overwinter a hive. And I'm convinced it's the mites. I've tried not to treat because I don't believe in it. I use other things. Am I just wasting my money, or should I get into the treatment stuff?
Well, I'll tell you what I do, and I don't think the treatment-free stuff works unless you've got a place where there's no other bees within 2 miles or 3 miles, and Tom Seeley over at Cornell has been trying to do this in a place called the Arnott Forest for a number of years, and it's 7 miles away from anybody else, and the circle around it, but the minute that their bees move out, they get infected, and I think you just have to try to follow these the IPM protocols, which are threefold. One is trying to get the best queens you can, find people that have resistant queens. Secondly, use some of these tactics, mechanical tactics like what's called drone trapping, where you deliberately have the bees raise, in effect, an extra body of drone, and then you pull them out before they hatch out, and give them the chickens, and then put those back in, and screen bottom boards, and then judicious selection of you hope as least invasive chemicals as possible. Oxalic acid, formic acid, thymol products, and rotate them. And so I've used 3 different chemicals in the course of this year. I used formic acid, and then I used in August I used thymol, and then just 3 weeks ago I used Hop Guard. So they're all organic chemicals, and even so, I'll lose hives. Last year was one of the worst years I've had, but I also try to always have enough hives so if I lose half of them, I still have a decent way to come out of the spring. I think this is what's so hard for novice beekeepers is they'll buy one hive, and then it dies. And then they say, oh God, can I try this again? Say, try it again. Then that one dies. And so when I teach this class at CVU, I say, if you can possibly get over that hump, get 2 hives when you begin, because it's like having 2 kids. They're going to be different personalities. And then if one dies, you have the other one from which to split. And then you can decide from there, and you don't get so depressed that you've through it. I've spent this $500, and what have I gotten for it? It's of headaches. So it's not as easy. When I started beekeeping like 50 years ago, you could practice benign neglect. I mean, you just let them go, and the only thing you worried about was foul brood. And then if you had foul brood, you burned the hive. Yeah. And gosh, it was, you could be a terrible beekeeper and still get a honey crop. Now you can be a good beekeeper and not get a honey crop.
Okay, so I got to reorientate my thinking.
Yeah. Are you a member of the BBA?
Not anymore.
Oh, come on, Rod. It only cost you $15.
I know, but it's just one of those things.
That's not even, they even charge 4 packs of beer for more than that.
I know. I just got sick of some of the people that were in there, and
Oh, it's a much better group.
kind of running things, and I said, I don't need this.
It really is a much better group. I can remember some of those early meetings when there'd be 10 or 15 people, and they just sit around and yak, and tell all war stories, and it was boring. It wasn't very helpful at all. But now it's slick. We got good classes, and so give us another chance.
Okay, I'll do that.
What else?
Ines has raised a hand.
Yeah.
Ines, go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is, so there is sunflower honey and other or orange blossom honey. Is there almond honey?
No, well, no one really sells it. It's pretty bitter. It is, and actually, even there's some controversy. Some people say that almonds are really hard on the bees, just being in there, and that the going through this, and they come out of the almond. They say out of the almonds. Almonds is what they say out there. Weak, and they have to take them somewhere else to get rejuvenated. And then there's another core of people who say that no, it's okay. It's more of a food for them than a food for us. I thought you were going to allude to where's the blueberry honey and where's the ivy honey and the heather honey and and in a place like Vermont, it's very hard to have what are called monofloral honeys. So you could say raspberry honey or blueberry honey or apple honey, because it's the floral sources they overlap, and so if you were to just put your hives out into a field, they're going to go for what's the most how shall I say, the most prominent nectar source, but there's also going to be other things in it. So you really can't sell monofloral honey. And my pitch is, what's the smartest dog? Smartest dog is a mongrel. The mongrel's got all this genetic mix in it. So what's the best honey? The best honey is a varietal honey, because it's got all these different floral sources in it, and you can taste them all. And if you're really good at this, then what's the best varietal honey is mine. And no one ever argues.
All right. Thank you very much.
Does that help at all?
No, that helps me, because I was just wondering, when they feed on all those almond blossom, if there is something, if this honey would be commercialized or something. But if it's bitter, then nobody wants it.
Yeah, no, they're in there to pollinate, between two different species of almonds, and that's why they're there. And as soon as the petals fall, they're out of there, and it's about a 3.5 week stay. Yeah. But it is amazing if you think here's 500 hives of bees brought from Pennsylvania, brought from Minnesota. They deadhead all the way across the country. They put this kind of a, not screen, but it's it's transparent. I mean, it's open, but the bees can't get out, so they go straight to the almond where they put them down, and at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, and by 10 o'clock they're flying around. They've oriented themselves. They're already in the blossoms, and the same thing happens on the return trip.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a note that I've noticed, I like to steal a little bit of the goldenrod honey at the end of the year. Tastes just like eating cinnamon to me.
Oh my God.
It's so good.
I think it tastes like eating gym socks. But
You're kidding me. No.
No, it just smells like gym socks.
Yeah, it does. But
I have a friend in Moncton. He loves goldenrod, and he bottles it. The problem, the commercial problem. I mean, if you're trying to sell to people, it's the quickest of the honeys to crystallize.
Yeah.
So you can almost watch it crystallizing. So the people that want clear honey, they're a little off put by that. But if you can get over that hump, then and you've got your customers, fine.
Yeah. I don't take it for customers. It's just for personal use.
Yeah.
Because, with me, I usually, when we get into the goldenrod, everything gets left.
Yeah.
At that point in the season, everything is left to the bees.
Yeah.
Just so I don't have to feed them.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think that the bookends of beekeeping for storing honey is dandelions in the spring to give them that first shot of stuff that they're going to consume. You're not going to be selling dandelion honey unless you're an oddball. And at the end is letting them have as much goldenrod as you can. And then when you have a bad goldenrod year, then you really have to give them ever more sugar water to get them up to the weight they need to get through the winter.
Right.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
So I was wondering, it's hard to find in Vermont creamy honey. And actually, I've never seen it around here. And I'm just wondering why. Because even when I'm in Germany, I usually buy the creamy honey because it crystallizes. It just stays the way it is.
Well, you're in luck. Champlain Valley Apiaries in Middlebury has been doing this kind of honey. It's naturally crystallized. It's not, they hate to use the word creamed. They don't like the word whipped, but it is as smooth as butter. Yeah. And you can just go to most big grocery stores will have it, and it'll be almost white. And so they that's been their biggest seller for 90 years, as long as they've done it. So they make the best, whether you call it creamed or not, but what you just described, they make that. And so it's Champlain Valley Apiaries. And if people like me want to do it, it's more complicated. There is a kind of a whipping process, and you have to maintain a certain temperature. But they've got some secret where they can do this in barrel-sized quantities, and then put it in jars, and it's excellent.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. This year, so we've been keeping bees for about 7 or 8 years. And this year we have 3 hives, and we didn't get enough honey to harvest. We just felt we had to leave what was there. And this is the first year this has happened. We treated for mites. They seemed healthy enough. We had to requeen one of the hives. So I'm just wondering, are there other beekeepers this year who had a no harvest or a low harvest?
Gosh. I don't know. I mean, when I've attended these monthly meetings, people talk about sort of an average year, but that's an average year of 8 or 10 people who are not all commercial, but they've all got 6, 8, 20 hives. And I know it certainly happens. It's happened to me in past years. That would be an individual hive as opposed to all of them. And so was this true of all of them that you?
Yeah, there was one is a pretty strong one, and I think it just didn't seem like enough to. We probably could have taken some honey from it, but to do all the setup with the extractor and everything, we just thought, let's just leave it,
Yeah.
And the other 2 ones really we don't think will make it through the winter, but they all. and that was kind of not a great one all summer long, but the other two seem, pretty strong, and we definitely treated for mites at least twice. So we just are kind of curious, like, because other years, last year was an average year. 2 years ago, we had 3 hives. We had the most we've ever had, as far as honey, all in the same spot.
Did you weigh? You know how much you had roughly per hive? How much? How much
Well, the
they
two
weighed?
good ones were about 130 pounds when we weighed the whole thing.
130 pounds of honey from the 3 hives.
Well, if we weighed the whole hive,
Yeah.
it weighed about 130 pounds
At the end or at the beginning?
at the end.
Yeah, because and this is for 2 deeps and a medium, or just 2 deeps?
2 deeps and a medium.
Boy, we've got. I'd want to have more weight than that if I would.
Okay.
I mean, we try to get ours up to 160.
160.
165.
Okay.
And that's why we fed a lot of sugar.
Well, maybe that's what we should have done, is to feed us some sugar water. It's too late now.
Well, but I would keep an eye on them, and because you may find in February that you could get in there and put on a top feeder, and because if it's gotten really light, but there's still bees in there, and they still got something of a cluster, then that's the time to feed them. You don't want to wait till the end of March.
Okay, so like mid-February?
Well, you check them. I mean, and see. You get a nice warm day, quasi-warm, and see. And I mean, the trick would be to just open up the outer cover and see where the bees are. If you got bees up in that right under there, then you probably need to feed them. If you hear them and they're down somewhere below, then you probably don't have to do anything because they've still got their cluster.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna order probably 2 hives for the spring anyway, just in case.
Good.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?